All right, it is Tuesday, 26th of March, 2024. This is Gimbalabs Playground. We get together every Tuesday at 1800 UTC to talk about stuff. This is a production of Gimbalabs and Friends. So I just wanted to share a quick overview of what this is for anybody who might be new. Like I said, it's called Gimbalabs Playground. Meets on Tuesdays at 1800 UTC. And the way it works is anybody who wants to can be a presenter. So you can see a column right here since September of who's presented during season 3 of Playground. And today we've got Ken talking about participating in the process of consent, maximizing concurrent experiments, and not missing out. Love this title, and I'm really excited. It sounds like maybe some of the work we've been doing at Open Spaces is starting to move out here into Playground. So Ken, thanks for taking the initiative on this. So before we jump into that, just so everybody knows, it's a 90-minute agenda. We take a few minutes just to say hey, and to make some announcements. And we usually start the main presentation by quarter after the hour. All presentation styles are welcome. So whether you got a product to pitch or an idea that you want to workshop or just a big conversation that you want to have, anything is welcome here. Often we do some combination of the above, as you'll probably see today. You're welcome to present. To sign up, all you have to do is go to this chart, find an empty row, drop your name in there, what you want to talk about, and that's it. You're officially scheduled. And so that brings us to today. Ken, thanks for jumping on the agenda today. What you got for us?
Okay, so I basically wanted to maybe split this discussion up into three sections, and I'm going to present some of my thoughts first, and then I'd like to move into discussion for each section. And so, let's see here. You see, yeah.
Let me highlight you. I want you to be full screen. How do I do that? That's very cool. How'd you do that?
It's OBS.
Nice, cool.
Yeah.
Maybe if the rest of us just, I think if the rest of us just turn our cameras off, then Ken will be full screen on the live stream. All right, go for it.
Okay. So, first I'd like to take a brief look at we're going to talk about um, S3 principles, like Sociocracy 3.0, and the principles that are involved in that. And we're going to look at it in terms of how it relates to distributed ecosystems. And so first I wanted to take a look at the 7 principles that are the basis of S3. And some of the definitions are a little bit different than what you would think of when you hear the term. So let's take a look at that first. So these are the seven different principles, and I've highlighted them sort of in a way that they're related to each other a little bit. So the first one is effectiveness, and the idea is that you're moving towards a goal. And then the second is consent. So the idea of consent is different than consensus. You're making objections, and you're trying to reduce undesirable consequences to the course of action that you're following. And then there's empiricism. We're doing experiments to try to make sense of things. And you've also got continuous improvements. So we regularly review what we're doing, and we make adjustments based on what we learn. And then you've got equivalence. So you try to involve people in decisions that affect them. That's what the what the definition is in the guide for S3. And you've got transparency, and the the more the more people know about the entire ecosystem, the more effective their contributions. So you want people to have the freedom to look at all the different pieces. You want it to be open and available to people so that they can get an idea of where they fit into the overall context. And also there's accountability. So you respond to needs, and as an individual, you do what you can to improve things. And as a group, you don't overlook the contributions of others. And so before we move on, I'd like to maybe ask anyone if they have any comments or about this. Any questions or comments?
I really appreciate these just simple definitions. A lot of people here I know have been looking into S3. And for anybody who's not familiar with it, the website Sociocracy 30 or Sociocracy 3.0.org, I'll put it in the chat, is a great place where anybody can go to learn more.
So my power just went out, so I may not have a whole lot of time with my laptop, but depending on whether it comes back, but oh, it's back again. That's the joy of living in Southeast Africa.
Perfect. Oh man, thanks for being
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I tried to give the simplest possible description of these definitions, and I sort of grouped them together in terms of the things that I wanted to focus on in our discussion today. So like the idea of making decisions and moving towards goals is sort of roughly related to the process of consent and wait a second. Oh, I just clicked on. Yeah, and then empiricism and continuous improvement. So you make experiments and then you adjust the experiments and you keep doing that until you get to a better process. And also with transparency and accountability, you want everything to be open, and you want to give people the freedom to move forward in the things that they're contributing to the overall goals. And so let's look more at the process of consent. So it's not consensus. Like consensus is based on finding agreement. So you want everybody to agree on a situation, but what does everybody learn if everybody agrees? Like you don't really learn anything from agreeing. You just everybody's following the group to the goal that someone chose to propose. And so if you have anyone who does disagree in the consensus process, they have the power to block progress in making decisions. And so consent is different because it's based on handling objections, and the yeah, there's a value in making objections and using objections as the decision-making process. So like the idea of an objection is you can have concerns and you can have objections, and an objection is basically a concern that's backed by evidence or sound reasoning, and it points towards ways that you can improve the process. And then Yeah, so you're the thing that's um blocking progress is something that can improve the situation, not just someone having an opinion against the direction of the rest of the group. And here's some things to note that, like, in order to to work in the process of consent, then the participants need to they share some consequences. They have shared goals. So like if there's need for consent, so like um some I can just go and do something by myself, and if it doesn't affect anyone else, then there's not really any need for consent in that situation. Like must be that there's shared resources required, or there's a shared risk in taking certain actions. And something that I'd like us to think about here today for a while is how much do people's goals overlap, and when you when you try to put together goals, um, how do people's goals compose together? So that's basically the first section that I wanted to share. So I'd like to open it up to some discussion about about consent and the process of consent. What do people think about it?
One thing I'll definitely carry with me is what you just said about this concept of how people's goals come together. And I recognize in my experiences of practicing consent that that feels like a really good way of describing the shared goal. This is where we're trying to get to, right? Where our goals are all coming together. Um, Helpful.
Yeah, yeah. Personally, I don't think it's always the case that we need to have shared goals, but it's important that when our goals overlap with each other, that there's a way for us to work together towards achieving those goals. Or even if I have one goal and you have another goal, how do you combine, like maybe components of the goals can combine together in some way? So how do you make it um so that, like, if you're just focusing on goals at a high level, and you don't look at the lower or the finer grained details, the higher resolution details, then maybe you lose opportunities where small goals can be aligned between individuals that maybe don't share larger goals. So that's part of what I'm interested in people's opinions on.
I can comment on that just a little bit, riffing on what James was saying, and especially you use the word compose. And when I hear a word like that, I automatically think, well, it needs to decompose as well. So what process goes two ways? And I get the example in my mind of you walk up to a guy and he's got a wheelbarrow full of mortar and he's got a bunch of bricks. And you say, what are you doing? And he says, oh, I'm laying bricks. Well, at this point, you can ask a composing question or you can ask a decomposing question. You can say, well, I can see you're laying bricks. Why are you laying bricks? And that's a composing question. You're going to start working your way up the conceptual ladder until you get to, he'll say, well, I'm building it because if I don't, we won't have a wall. You say, well, why do we need a wall? Well, if we don't have a wall, how do we close in this cathedral? You say, why do you need to close in a cathedral? because we need a place where people can worship. Why do people need to worship? Like, you can keep working your way up that abstraction until you find that shared meaning. Alternatively, you can work your way down. You say, well, I can see you're laying bricks. How are you laying bricks? And it's like, oh, well, I slap mortar onto it with a trowel. And you say, well, how do you do that? And you're getting into the very detailed skill level. So that's what I think of when you bring up the compose, decomposed, excuse me, abstraction.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good perspective.
I keep asking my son, what are you doing? He says, homework. And I'm like, well, yeah, I can see that. So you got me thinking about Jeremy.
Does anyone else have thoughts on this before we move on to something else?
Yeah. So first, it's a pretty kind of, we discussed this before, but I like abstract discussions, and this is, like somewhat abstract discussion for like how do you talk about goals. And I want to first, a word comes up that I just learned this week. The word is axiology. It's a study of values. Didn't know that. And so it's a kind of philosophical, mode of thinking, something like that. And then just getting back to what Jeremy was saying about how you move up and down abstraction levels when you talk about goals and acting together, I want to bring up the idea of, well, the idea is somewhat finally named in our context because we have everything functional, but I cannot like literally do anything about it because some scientists named it that. It's called functional synchronization. It's like, so the core idea to understand that like synchronization is important, right? So like things that have cycles and they have feedback between each other, they tend to synchronize their cycles. And it's a mathematical phenomenon which is like surprisingly abundant and surprisingly new to talk about as like how ubiquitous it is. And functional synchronization is a sort of idea expressed in a book which is written by a Gestalt psychologist on topic of understanding complex systems. And what they describe is like if you put a group of people in a room with a Lego, they would spontaneously synchronize. They will start assembling this Lego into pieces, like if they understand the task, right, or like have motivation. But it's like the funny thing is like in some cases it's pretty implicit how it happens, and people just don't have to have communication. They just look at each other, see what other people are doing. They kind of infer the goals, and then they kind of find slots to fit, and this happens. Nobody knows how. So yeah.
Oh yeah, hey everybody. That is like spontaneous organization. That sort of to me is that if the hammer and a nail, like if you're a hammer, then the whole world looks like a nail. If you only know hammers and nails, you're going to classify things into hammers and nails. And what resonated with me, or what came to me again when you were given the introduction, was like surfacing those goals. And for those who don't understand or don't quite know why they're doing something or how they're doing it, they're just doing it. This could get into that, like, what if there are no goals, or for the non-goal oriented to get to consent? For instance, when the parent asks you why you're doing or what you're doing, and you're like, I don't know, or why you're doing your homework, I don't know. Like, so there's a part of this whole process of awareness or discovery of goals that can then be kind of fun, because then you're like, oh, look, we share some goals, etc.
Yeah, yeah. Like I was just thinking about like flocks of birds, and if you've heard of the Boyd algorithm, like where you've got each individual is going in a certain direction, and then everybody else is trying to stay close to the other individuals and move in sort of the same direction as the other individuals. And they also try not to run into each other. And then you just with a few simple rules, you get the patterns that flocks of birds fly in, and you can have thousands and thousands of birds all flying together without running into each other. So that's sort of something that we can think about, like if we all have our goals, maybe they align in certain conditions where you don't want to run into each other, but like every individual has a mind of their own, basically. So like, yeah.
Well, I did get into trouble at career day when they asked like what my goal was, like what my career choice would be, and I told them that my goal was to get out of this class, and that got me a talk after the class. And basically it was like, I'm a bird that doesn't want to, I don't care where we're going, I just don't want to run into anybody, that's the deal, So that's not, I've moved off of that now, but
there are a few things that every bird needs, like food and water and stuff like that. So there are some shared goals, like finding out what that substrate is, like the basic shared goals that everybody in the group has. That's important.
Yep. Lowering my hand, thank you.
Steve. You have your hand up.
It's hard to do this on a phone.
Oh,
I'm really I'm really intrigued by the language, and the sociocracy stuff about consent, and whether this desire, like I think inside it's very attractive, the idea that we could find consensus. And for the most part, my experience in various Gimbalabs activities over the years, most of the time there's consensus. Sometimes there is not. And I don't mind that tension, and I enjoy the debate. I think the only debate that I observed in Gimbalabs that was for me exhausting was whether to use Figma or Miro. That was just, I did not care, but it went on and on and on. But what's most concerning to me, because of what we see in the United States, or have seen in the United States, and what I've experienced over the last few years with my partner working with nonprofits, is that consent and how it devolves from whatever mission statement, in theory aligns everyone. And like there's an arts council that we were a part of that has devolved into, they don't care about membership in their arts group. It's more about the members of the board promoting themselves, and that's all that they do. And that may be okay for them who are currently on the board right now, but for people from the outside, like we are now, it used to be about highlighting all of the artists in the area, right, and promoting everybody, and that gets lost out of self-interest. And people who can build, have the technical skills to build in crypto, they've got a lot of reason to be self-interested in getting involved with crypto now, because there are clear indications this is going to be a wave that takes over the world. And they want to be the John D. Rockefellers of the oil industry. They want to be the first. And there's a lot of room for people to be first here. But that, because it's so technical, you kind of have to let your own interests go to a certain level and trust that your presence is going to allow you to see where, you know, your economic opportunity lies, and then build for the sake of building something well. And I've always had a lot of respect for most of the people that I interact with in the Cardano community, because they seem to be willing to do that more than, you know, other businesses or groups of people that I've worked with. You know, it's like, we know we're all going to be fucking rich because we're the ones building this stuff that's going to be the foundation for something much, much larger than ourselves. You know, and that's a little bit of hyperbole there, but you know, we're all going to do okay. You know, we're going to be okay. Money's not the issue here. And you know, the US's experiment in democracy is really failing, you know, in that there is no voice of the people anymore, right? It's the money that decides things, you know, it's the corporations that are deciding things. And we don't, you know, our representatives, our D-reps, you know, the ones that we delegate our power to, even the ones who kind of like we would most align with, they're powerless in the face of those economic powers and influences. And so what I wonder about, you know, as we build these things in Cardano, organizations like Gimbalabs or WADA or, you know, any number of them, there's so many of them. How do we keep that devolution from occurring? You know, how do we avoid that? You know, how do we encourage debate and not be shouted down by the strongest personality or the bag with the biggest, you know, voting power? You know, like, this is a real concern to me, and I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, while I respect so much the language that Sociocracy V3 in particular is applying to some of these concepts, you know, it's almost like we need everybody to kind of go through some personal growth programs to, you know, be able to tamp down their own self-interest in order to have the patience for a larger process to go on. And you know, and I don't know where the answer is, or what kind of keeps everything in balance for us over time, over the long haul. But I really appreciate you talking about this, Kim.
Yeah, like there are some had a thought that left for a second there. Let's see. Maybe I'll just continue with what I have here, and we can. Yeah. So that's sort of what you were talking about, Steve. It has to do with the different experiments, and um, I think that there are possibly ways that you can find the right balance between people's self-interest and people's interest in working together as a group. There's limitless possibilities in how things can be structured. It's just a matter of searching through the space of possible things to see if there's something that works well. Like we might not find something perfect, but I'm sure that there's things that are better than current processes. Like, and if there's something that we can do that provides benefit to people, where people's needs are being met, then it will provide incentive for people to get on board and think about things in a different way. Maybe if you do have those composable goals where people can find out how they can work towards the benefit of others without compromising their own goals, then that would be good for everybody. So let's move on to looking at experiments, and I do also have some issues with the way that the sociocracy 3.0 stuff is usually viewed. So like the S3 is focused mainly on improving operations within an organization. So there's issues that you can find with this perspective. But an organization, like an organism, has the unified goal of self-preservation. And so you think of organizations as like they're entities, and the individuals in the organization have their own goals of preservation, but the organization can too. And when you get into the situations where you have really big organizations, that those goals can sometimes conflict with the goals of people at lower scales. So yeah, I think we can shift our perspective of how to work with the principles in S3 to looking at things in terms of an ecosystem instead of an organization. And with an ecosystem, you don't necessarily have shared goals with everybody involved, and you need to have some sort of balance between different actors in the ecosystem. Like you've got food chains, so you've got in a like there's a I'm sure that you could come up with analogies for that in terms of an economic ecosystem. Like so and then you've got like competition for resources, and then there's balancing factors. So like how do you make sure that population control is in balance? And sometimes in an ecosystem you have an invasive species that disrupts the existing system, and so like this is a metaphor. And so maybe in some context you think disruption is or isn't desirable. So like yeah, sometimes you want things to change, sometimes you don't want things to change. And organizations can perform internal experiments, but what about experiments at the ecosystem level? Like how do you, like if you're looking at the S3 processes, how would that be able to apply to the interactions between organizations? So how do you make the perspective broader? How do you, like, it's important, again, being able to have the clear picture where there's transparency, where everybody can see where things are, where they fit into the bigger picture. And what about the bigger picture between organizations? Like that's an important thing to consider. So like how do we apply these to a larger context? And that's where I'd like to open it up to discussion again. Like what do people think about applying the S3 principles to a larger context, like the entire Cardano ecosystem, or even outside Cardano? Like what do you think about that? I can go back to the principles if you want to see those. Yeah. Anyway, any thoughts?
Oh, you know what? If Juan was here, he would tell us to get up and move around some. It's that time.
40 minutes.
But that is Ken, you blow me away. Yeah, everyone here does, but I really particularly liked your way of thinking, because that is true. This sort of difference between an ecosystem and an organization, and the idea of internal, like it reminded me of this quote from, it was either Deming or Ackoff, two systems thinkers, and they said you can change an organization, so you can make an internal change. That's debatable, but he says you have to negotiate with a system. So that systems, and then the reason for this, and this is like some systems design stuff, and actually a system is a non-causal relationship, meaning that you do something and it kind of goes into a black box. Like you don't know if you take out the apex predator, you don't really know what's going to happen. It turns out that if you take out the apex predator, then all of the streams get cloudy and die. And you're like, what? The stream is not connected to the wolf, but it turns out that blah 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 through a series of connections in the ecosystem, which are sort of hard to discern. Again, that point of awareness, that these non-causal or complex interactions can happen. So that's what I sort of thought of, and I think that's a really cool way of like internal experiments and external experiments.
Yeah, like I want, if we have a system in place, like if you're talking about the Cardano as a whole, yeah, there are some things that you want to have total consensus about. You want to have total consensus about the state of the ledger. So you want to make sure that no one can spend their ADA twice, the same ADA twice. So that's the kind of thing that you want consensus for. So like if you're talking about a system, I like the idea of having the freedom to opt in or opt out of a system. So as members of the Cardano community, we have chosen to opt into the system of Cardano and everything that entails at the protocol level. So if you set up a system that is meant to deal with goals and to collaborate on building up a shared knowledge base, then you can design reliable processes in the base of the system, in the base structure that people will opt into, and if it's successful, then people who use the system can be successful. And so you want a minimum amount, like you don't want it to be over intrusive, because you want to just have the base platform where you can build different experiments that coexist on the platform. And so that's sort of my idea about how you would want to build up that ecosystem of experiments as opposed to just an organization of experiments. More thoughts? So, like, I didn't.
Is anybody hearing about sociocracy for the first time here and maybe want to jump in? What are you thinking if this looks new to you?
Hello, may I talk a little bit?
Yes, of course. Welcome.
So this is, I can say that it's my first time because I have been participating maybe more than a year ago when I was active in the Project Catalyst voting and also evaluating projects, but I haven't been so active in the last 1 year. Yeah, that's quite interesting. What I see is that you have several topics that you are discussing every week, I guess. And today's topic is really interesting to me. And actually, I was interested in the game part because I think it was led by Newman. It was quite interesting and it took my attention. And this topic is also interesting to me because nowadays I was thinking about how we can actually increase cooperation skills. It's because of the project that I'm involved in. And gamification and cooperation actually kind of completing each other because these new generation, younger than us, let's say, are playing actively games. And I was thinking as an academician, how I can actually use games or gamification to promote cooperation, to solve some global challenges. I mean, I found quite interesting what you are discussing. Of course, you mostly talk about ADA community and sociography. Sociocracy is also interesting to me. I have came across of this platform before. And we are trying to do something similar actually in my organization called Renaissance Institute. So I'm very much happy to connect with you again, although some of your names are familiar with me, like Felix, Jonathan, Newman, and Sebastian. I connected to LinkedIn. So it will be great to participate more of your sessions to discuss further and find some solutions together.
Awesome. Welcome, Oscar. Ken, should we keep going? Because I think you're following a good thread here.
Yeah, I've only got a little bit left that I prepared. Like I've got some ideas that I wanted that we could probably talk about too, but like the last thing that I wanted to focus on was the not missing out part. And so that's somewhat related to the last two items here. So you've got transparency, where the more people know about the entire system, the more effective their contributions. Part of not missing out is being able to see where you can fit into the overall landscape of what's going on. And then accountability, like building culture is a part of building organizations. So when you see something that needs to be responded to, like building up the culture of having the taking the initiative to do what you can to respond to issues. When you see something that needs to be improved, you work on ways that you can improve it. And also part of the accountability that was in the definition on the S3 guide, it talks about not overlooking contributions. Like everybody, like you see everybody's contributions, and that's important because you want to give something to people who are contributing. So like if you're talking about a company, which is one of the main focuses of S3, then people are compensated with money for their time. maybe in other situations it's recognition. But you need to consider what people do, and you need to see how what people do fits into the broader perspective or the broader picture. And so, like, there's the process of reviewing, or the process of like proving whether or not someone did what they said they did. If you're talking about a system where things are open and available for everybody to see, then it's not as big a deal. Like there isn't as much of a need for you to have the overhead of that oversight process if the process of actually doing the work is available for everybody to look at. And I think I'll move to just the last few things that I was thinking about. Like, how do you ensure the liberty of individuals? Like, there are certain things that benefit the entire ecosystem if individuals have the certain liberties. So see, when what the example I brought up before was the freedom to opt in or to opt out of a system. So one of the major problems that you see in governments is that it's not easy to opt in or opt out of what people are prescribing. So if you, but when you have that ability to opt in or opt out, that's where you get incentives for the organization to compete for people's approval. So that's the idea, is that you want to set things up in a way where if people don't approve of what this system is doing, then they can move to another system that's doing things in a better way. And if people do approve, then your system benefits from that, and the experiment can continue. So if you don't have any incentive mechanism, like where for people to approve of how the system is running, then you don't have people acting in the interest of their customers. So like a government doesn't necessarily have to act in the interest of its customers, its citizens, if the process of elections is skewed by some other forces that don't take into account how it affects the individuals involved. And the same thing can be said for other organizations. So anytime that people have no choice, like if there's a monopoly on some product, then people don't have the choice to choose something else that does things in a better way, and then you don't have the competitive forces that cause things to improve for everybody involved, because it incentivizes the businesses to make things cheaper, and also to provide a better product for their customers, and so that they can compete with each other. It's in that case, like when you're talking at the ecosystem level, competition is good for those types of factors. And okay. yeah, just so the other thought is compensation. How do you structure the system so that people are fairly compensated for what they put into the different experiments that they're involved in? And ultimately you want to have an ecosystem that gives people the ability to thrive. So different people have their different interests and the things that they want to focus their work on and the things that they're good at. And so how do you maximize the effectiveness of people's works, even in the context of different organizations? That's basically all I had as far as my presentation goes. And so I think I'll open it up for the rest of the time to discussion about this topic.
I'm going for the clap emoji. Here it is. Here it is. Clapping. Yep. Well done. Thank you, sir. Yay. Ken, what do you, I mean, tell us your background with the sociocracy. It seems like you've got like a good beat on it, but did you study it? Did you go through the thing?
I only read through the book this like a week ago. The guidebook a week ago. I listened to it at 2.5 times speed. Yeah, so
I just had the visual of your brain
then
like doing the big flex. You're like, oh, it's just 2.5 weeks, I'm 2.5 times speed, you're like, yeah, that's how I do it. You know, all right. Well, I think it's really cool, and I wonder if others feel the same way, that, because I've been studying it and going through the things, and we've had a couple of work groups, and we've got like a study group, and it's really cool to get a fresh perspective on it. It's great.
Thanks. I missed part of that. My internet cut out for a second there, but yeah, I'm glad to have the opportunity to share my perspective on it. Like a lot of what I do, my main focus is on, I spend a lot of time studying programming language design. So like comparing the semantics of different programming languages. And so the way that I sort of think about things is I try to decompose it into the minimum points, and then I try to think about how those fit together in different contexts. So that's basically, it's a similar process. Like there was a lot of, like when I was putting together this presentation, like there are lots of things that I didn't go into, but that relate back to some ideas in programming language design. So like in some recent meetings, I've mentioned that I'm playing around with a programming language called Pony, and it's a actor model language. And one of the interesting things about it is that it doesn't have any blocking operations. Like there's no operations in the language that can block other things from happening. And like within the context of one actor, an actor can do only one thing at a time. But between actors, any actor can, like they have a scheduler, and then the actors can be distributed across the processors so that any actor can be running on any processor. But like you have the sequential processes that are required for building an application, and you also have things that are possible to distribute. And so you want to keep the sequential things at a minimum. And like the the analogy of actors, it goes back to like people working individually. So like when you're working as an individual, you're pretty much only able to do one thing at a time. And like there's also the concept of how do you share work between things? How do you share information between two actors? And there's certain cases like you don't want different people to have to do the same thing at the same time, or you don't want people to try to read and write at the same time the same piece of data. And so like there's correlations involved there. So like I spend a lot of time thinking about how different types of systems correlate with each other. And that's basically how my mind works on these topics. Like maybe another thing that maybe we could spend the last part of this time talking about. One of the things I've thought about recently is like if you have a system that uses like a the word just slipped my mind for a second there. Like I don't usually think in words all the time. I think in abstract pictures, and so like finding the right word is sometimes like if you are able to subscribe to people's work, like if you have a subscription sort of process for how you interact with people instead of people being dependent on an organization. Like that's basically how YouTube works. If you cut out the middleman, you don't necessarily have to have the company that keeps most of the profits. But if you have the ability to have the individuals work autonomously, and you have a way that you can compose their work together, then you can have the same sort of subscription model, and maybe under the subscription model, each individual has the ability to publicly say that they're going to donate a certain, like maybe you have different brackets where up to a certain range, like it all goes to the content producer, and then at that certain point, maybe they give a certain percentage to a circle of people who are contributing to a similar work process or something like that, and then you can build up different layers. Like that's sort of my abstract idea for how you can have different experiments like in an ecosystem setting. So like instead of having an organization that that everybody has to agree on directions, then you can have different people who will gravitate towards others that they agree with on a certain process, and it sort of would allow experiments to arise naturally in that case, where if you can see what everybody is doing, like you can search through the different people doing different work, and you can like maybe have a knowledge graph of what you're working on, and other people can riff off of your knowledge base and you can make connections that way because different people's work fits together. And then you have a process for building up joint ventures in some natural way where it builds out of the small groups coming together to do different things as teams. That's sort of where my thought process is.
So what are the component parts of that? How do we build it?
Well, just a second here.
Am I still on? Or did nobody have an answer to that question?
We got you.
Okay.
Lost my
Jeremy's got one answer in the chat. Intelligent, transparent backlog, capable of communicating essential characteristics of efforts, where essential is a composable concept of anyone evaluating the relevance of the backlog, customizable tag filters, for example. Backlog being a term that's used formally in the sociocracy stuff. To mean all the stuff that we could do, right?
Yeah, I guess one of the things that I've wanted to do for a long time is try to build a knowledge management tool and something that's specifically tailored towards this kind of ideas and the both like merging together the process of knowledge management with code management. And I actually have a proposal I wrote up if people want to see it, that's about getting one of the Notion accounts with the Gimbalabs stuff. So in order to so like people can look at that if they want to.
Cool.
Yeah. So in order to look at Notion, see how things work, to see what works well for Gimbalabs and what doesn't work well, and use that to build up ideas and plans for maybe making something that's better, something that's free for people to use, like so that we don't have the problem of having to get access to a specific system in order to collaborate or merge ideas together.
Have you have you ever used Obsidian for anything for PKM?
Yeah, I've used it a lot. Like some of the things I don't like about Obsidian, like there you can pretty much do everything you would ever want to do with it, but it takes a lot of time to set things up. Yeah, you have to go through and try different things and then see what works for you and what doesn't work. Like one of my thoughts is if you have a system where the configuration of the system is part of your knowledge base, and so maybe you could even make it public what your configuration is, so that anyone can copy your configuration if they like it and change things, or they can copy part of it, and it would just be part of your knowledge graph. So like if you have a way to, like, you tag it in a certain way, or you have types, maybe you could set up a way to have expressive types that describe different subsections of your knowledge graph.
There's a detail here you got me thinking about that I think is kind of like it's kind of like it's the balancing point on which all of this stuff comes together, right? So on the one hand, we have this idea that yes, like a paid organizational Notion account presents a barrier to entry from people collaborating, right? What's the barrier to entry? This many US dollars per year, for example, and then we can build a system to say, well, here's the process for somebody getting one of those. And then on the other hand, we have this ability to imagine replacements or at least custom solutions. And Obsidian, a group of people working together, sharing an Obsidian book, can be a very powerful way to collaborate. And for people who know how to use it, that's a way that people can come together without spending extra money to make something work. But what did they spend instead? They spent time, right? And so we can imagine this concept of building a replacement for the paid tool, right? I would love to build a YouTube replacement built on all that Web3 stuff, for example.
I think they could all be the same thing. Like my thought is that if you have a knowledge graph and you
Right.
can incorporate videos into it, then there's really no need for having YouTube on top of that. If you have a way to distribute the information.
But so this is what I'm getting at. So exactly, right? So you could do that too, but who's the you that could do it? And we have to be really thoughtful because I've seen this dynamic. It feels like a lot of the times when we start to play around with these sociocratic processes, or even going back further, just broadly a commons, it seems like there's a really high barrier to approval for spending, from our recent example at Gimbalabs, right? Like 90 US dollars per person per year for something. Whereas at the very same time that we might be careful to spend that money, I don't know if we're as careful with each other's time. And often it feels okay to come along and say, well, we should build this replacement for this tool, right? But if we really do the arithmetic, is that a better deal? And I'm not saying I know the answer for sure. I haven't done the analysis. But I think collectively, that's one of the things I'm seeing that we need to practice in order to collaborate. Asking somebody to take the time to build something, or even to configure Obsidian, right? You just said it takes some time, right? Asking people to spend time is really expensive. So how do we balance that? As we start to build these systems where it's like, okay, we could talk about how to spend money, we could talk about how to spend time. How do we hold those things in similar regard?
Yeah, like part of the reasoning, like I would, like with enough time, I could, and the motivation, like I could build a tool myself, basically. But like I think some of the benefits of being able to looking at things from a different perspective than what's out there. Like there's some other tools that are out there that are similar to what I have in mind. Like I've been playing around a little bit with AnyType recently. That's another tool that, like, you can share work between across different devices and stuff. Or but like one of the things I'm looking at is sort of the way that there's different technologies that where you have different parts of the technology that could fit together in a really nice way. So if you look at Nix, it gives you the ability to define a build process. Like you can have a proof, like like basically it's like it's sort of similar to on a blockchain, you want to have proof that what everything that started at the beginning, it got to where it goes at the end somehow. So like you have in the build, like the build of each application, like you get a different hash based on the dependencies, the dependency graph of that build. And so like there's interesting concepts there. There's interesting things in Git, like there's overlap in between that and Git. And yeah, there's a lot of different things that, like if you could just go to someone's public knowledge base and you can see how they structure their workflow, and then you could just select their workflow and drag it onto your computer and use the same workflow for your knowledge base, and then tweak it to fit what you're doing, then that would drastically improve the situation you have with something like Obsidian.
But again, does that improve the situation for the person whose workflow was forked?
The workflow isn't necessarily the knowledge. If your knowledge base, like if you have a record of like, if you can just post a cryptographic hash to the blockchain, and then that would give you a record of someone's commits to their knowledge base. Like you can see that if they have this hash on the blockchain, then you can know that this contribution to the public sphere of knowledge was made at a certain date, and if someone else tries to use it in their work, like if the piece of knowledge is named based on the hash of what's inside the knowledge, then if you have the same knowledge in different places, it will have the same name. And if you have that, then you can determine where the knowledge came from. And so that way, like if someone forks a knowledge base, you know that the original, or forks someone, whether it's their work or whether it's their configuration, like you can see that the configuration came from the original location, and that these changes were made, then maybe someone else liked the changes that this person did. So you have a clear distinction between the changes someone made, the diff on the overall knowledge base, and then you can attribute the diff to that person and attribute the original work to the other person. Steve?
Yeah, this takes me back to a thought I tried to share, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago. You know, if we're going to tokenize what we're calling Gimbalabs ecosystem, you know, this time is the one thing we all have the same amount. And what James is talking about is a real issue, right? You know, because, you know, people want your time. when you've achieved a certain level of ignition in a larger community. And, you know, the effort that we're experiencing and building out this ecosystem, you know, just this Gimbalabs ecosystem, you know, is, you know, what we base our share in the ecosystem. You know, if we're going to token, what do we base our share on it in? You know, because my computer is better than your computer, or, you know, my internet can be faster than yours, and that's, you know, that's all. Doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the quality work. The work comes from, you know, you know, the time, ability to think well with that time. That I have the same as James does, but I'm pretty sure he gets more out of his time than, right? And the reality of Gimbalabs now is based on James's effort than my effort because of time, effectivity, you know, but you can prove. And I think the time you can prove, you know, and that's why I feel like I'm beginning to feel like no matter where we go, you know, if we're building this on Cardano, right, and that the economic structures and the share structures are going to be built some way on Cardano, there's whatever the product is that business provides, service that business provides, and then time involved from the people with the business. And so I think much like these algorithmic stablecoins, you know, we really need to think about the trading part of our tokenizing an ecosystem and the governance part of that ecosystem itself. And I really want to hear us talk about tokenization from this perspective, because it doesn't seem to me that there's anything reasonable to use governance token other than one that's based on time.
Yeah, I basically
And
have
I
the
don't mean
same,
time in terms of seniority necessarily.
yeah, I've
Go ahead.
basically been thinking exactly the same thing. So like if you have like you can have your other currencies, but like there's not really a stability for a cryptocurrency. So like what is it based on? Like if you have a stable coin that's based on the dollar, how stable is the dollar really? And so like it's based on something that, like any time that the basis is based on the basis for the price or the value comes from a market. So like you have like a exchange rates for currencies, and so people are trying to make money doing exchanges, and so you've got well there's some like with cryptocurrencies, because speculation is so common, like you see the big fluctuations in the price. Like it's not really too different than with regular fiat currencies. Like it's based on somewhat on governments and how they choose to print their currency, or what their international policies are, all sorts of different things. But if you have something that's based on the time, that like having maybe a stable coin that like where's the source of truth coming from? Like if you're talking about JED, then the source of truth is like there has to be some connection to the value of the dollar in relationship to the value of ADA. And so you need a source of truth that comes ultimately from outside of the ecosystem. for that. But
Yeah,
if you have something based on people's work within the context of the ecosystem, like if you can measure the amount of people or the amount of time that people work on things, and you can see, like if you have this subscriptions or people donate to other people's work, then you would have on the system, you'd have records of those interactions. And say that if you look at the median, so like where 50% of the people are making more than a certain amount and 50% of the people are making less, then and you use that value as your basis for the transfer rate between time and between ADA or whatever other currency that you're doing exchanges with. Maybe have a stable coin sort of situation where the source of truth comes from, like maybe it's a side chain or something that you can compute the actual value where it's like a median income based on time spent. Like people, like I think I've thought a little bit about the incentive structures for that and thought of some beneficial things about it. I'm not sure if we should go into that in more detail here, but I think that there's an idea there that can like one of my goals is to cut the value of whatever token that's being used on the platform away from the like either a speculative market or the way that or the yeah how what the government's doing or whatever. Like if there's a way to do that, then it would benefit the ecosystem.
We got an open slot coming up for tokenomics. If people want to keep that conversation going, there's nothing on the schedule for next Tuesday. If anybody wants to, all you have to do to facilitate a conversation is show up and be the one asking questions, and then you can let everybody else talk. But so if somebody had like 8 questions about tokenomics, jump in. Facilitate the next playground. Ken, this is awesome. Thank you. And I know it doesn't end right here. I love, I honestly, I felt like I was watching like PBS with the overlay too on the screen. It was very fun to watch. Thank you for the well-prepared stuff. And I really hope that this recording can become like a reference piece for people who are coming in and starting to understand some of this stuff. As we keep going deeper and practicing our engagement with these patterns.
Thanks everybody for listening. I enjoyed sharing my thoughts. Usually I try to let everybody else speak and I don't say too much. And so I think it's a bit of a strain to try to take the reins of the conversation like that, but it's a good thing for people to speak up when they have things to say. If you have any objections, please help us to make the process better.
Heck yeah. Thank you. All right, everybody. Same time next week. We do this every Tuesday at what time does it start? 1800 UTC. And we'll be back tomorrow, Wednesday and Thursday, for open spaces where some deeper forms of these conversations lead to doing stuff. We're making some progress on a couple projects right now. So looking forward to that. Gimbalabs.com/calendar if you want to get involved. See you next time. Bye, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks, y'all.